Right. So again, good morning, everyone. So welcome back to the hard work after the coffee break. Now, for this plenary session, it is a real pleasure and a delight to be able to introduce Dr. Maurizio Gotti, who's going to be delivering the plenary lecture. I went out to the printer to print a sort of summary of Dr. Gotti's CV, and the printer was about to run out of ink and out of paper. I had to print it in two pages in one, because otherwise I won't have enough paper. So it's very difficult to introduce Dr. Gotti and say everything which is worth saying about him. He has a very long, intense academic career. His publications are a source of reference in specialized discourse, in various areas of specialized discourse. I am sure that many of us are acquainted with his publications, and some of them are an obligatory citation in any type of work we do, both what he has written himself and what he has been editing and encouraging. Because one of the good things about Dr. Gotti, in addition to his being a delightful fellow and a very easy person to get on with, he's a real gentleman. It's a pity we didn't have him earlier in Alicante. So not only does he do things himself, but he finds time to encourage others to do things and to promote research. So the best example probably is his founding and directing the Center for Specialized Languages in Bergamo, which is a role model for many specialized languages, institutes and centers all over the world. So that is why, in addition to his publications, in addition to all his institutional posts, he can really be said to be a real academic in all senses of the word. But then at the same time, he's a very modest person, he's a very easygoing person, and I am sure that you will enjoy very much his presentation, and you will be asking at the end of this presentation, can we please bring Dr. Gotti again in the future? Thank you very much, Maurizio. They're all yours.
Well, thank you. Many thanks. I would like to thank Dr. Miguel Campos for these very nice words of introduction, and particularly Dr. Chelo Vargas for the kind invitation and all the organizing and the scientific committee of the conference. It's really a great pleasure for me to be back to Spain, to be for the first time in Alicante, to meet all these very interesting colleagues and very good friends in many cases. So I'm really grateful to you. I will move over there for my presentation. The topic that I have chosen here, also looking at the title of the conference, was Interdisciplinary Cooperation. As a matter of fact, this is quite a topical issue, and I wanted to give some thoughts about it. Cooperation between applied linguists and professional experts has been emphasized recently in many ways, and both on the part of the linguists and professional experts. It's a tricky field because somehow it exposes us to different methodological approaches, epistemic approaches, and therefore it's aimed also as a good way of integrating different diversity in methodological approaches. Then this combination of efforts often leads to the discovery of different procedures, different knowledge that may be helpful to the other discipline, or sometimes may discover some of the things that are hidden to the professionals, which instead are visible to linguists. Of course, it is also important for us because it helps us to understand better how professionals use discourse, we use language, to achieve their objectives. So we have a deeper insight, we have a greater knowledge of what is going on, because we can actually work with the professionals themselves. Research into communication has become an important issue also for professionals. More and more of them are aware now that it's not only the contents that is of value, which of course is important in discoveries, particularly in sciences and so on, but also the way you communicate your discoveries. And this has become more and more important now with globalization, with the internet, with all the media that we now have. It's important to focus, even for us, to the context, not so much only to focus on the outcome, but in order to understand the text or the discourse that is presented to us, we often have to find out more about the conditions of production of a text. That will explain many of the choices of the authors, but also to see how they are received. So also in terms of condition of reception. Sometimes they may be quite unexpected for the writers themselves, and therefore they will have to find out why. And this depends on how the message was communicated. Professional practices are seen as dynamic processes. They are not stabilized, they're not fixed. They are the result of continuous negotiation. That's why the surrounding environment is so important, both in production and in reception, because the text in itself is not neutral, it's not there, it's actually something that is negotiated, something that is a sort of result of competing interests and therefore constant struggle. Workplaces, as we have all found out, are not unitary in their discourse. So when we deal with disciplines, we tend to generalize, and we instead have to be aware of the fact that workplaces are complex places where there are dynamic interactions going on. And the boundaries are not so fixed as we tend to generalize. Of course, when we tend to write and draw conclusions, we try to generalize because we want to say something which is not limited to a single case. But we have to be aware that we start from a single case or several different cases, and we try to generalize, but there are so many other cases in which things might be a bit different. We often find that although the members of a community usually adopt the same standards, the same practices, they work from the same goals, however, they interpret them in a flexible way, depending on their own identity, on their own personality, on their own situation. We have seen also yesterday, I mean, in Highland's plenary, for example, difference between an established professor publishing compared to a young scholar. So, I mean, the results are going to be different in terms of discourse as well, because, I mean, the personality, the standard, and also the way of taking risks is different according to your career. What I'm here exploring is a joint analysis of a specific discourse event, which is seen as a result of cooperation between the linguist and the specialist. In the past, specialists didn't seem to bother about this. Now instead, they tend to become more and more aware of this aspect of language, discourse, communication. Particularly, we often find in their testimonies, in their writings, that they are aware now that the form of a text is as important as the content, or at least it has a great role to play. This because it helps them refine, to strengthen their interpretive skills. They see something which is a bit more complex, something which is beyond the evidence of words, and this actually increases their and improves their critical activity. So, of course, they have their own exegetic techniques, which can be, however, refined, which can, in working with professionals, often found that they said, oh, we discovered another way of seeing things, another way of appreciating phenomena which we hadn't seen before. So, of course, when we have linguists and professionals working together, we have obviously different goals. Usually the specialist is obsessed by an immediate problem, and so that's why he or she seeks the help of a linguist, because there is some problem in communication, some problem in interpretation, there is something that here doesn't seem to be working. So you, as a linguist, can you give us a hand? And this is the main focus. The linguist instead, of course, is interested in exploring this event, and this linguistic event, but at the same time, in order to understand better the rules of the game, that is, what is happening there, what sort of genres they have, what sort of linguistic elements they focus on, what sort of strategies they follow, and so on. So, of course, we usually, the people that take part in this joint effort already have a basic background in the analysis of that specific field or that specific disciplinary discourse. But they want to actually test what they know, comparing what they know to what is really happening. This proves to provide newer insights that may be helpful to both. And so Mara points out that it's a matter of not just researching on something, which is what we usually do, but researching with somebody else that has different approaches, different epistemological presuppositions, different ideas, and so different discursive practices. And this may be quite interesting, but at the same time quite difficult, because at first you have to find out what sort of language you're using, because this language doesn't seem to be shared. So you have a long time of exploration of each other's field. So Celia Roberts point out that this also requires that this joint involvement should be carried out at all steps, not just in the analysis, but even in the exploration of the goals, the exploration of the materials, and so on, and also the sharing of the results. So it is a joint effort which requires joint cooperation at all steps. As I said before, this kind of research is dynamic, is active, because you should be somehow prepared to changing things. That is, you don't just start from a standpoint and then you stay there all the time, but you adapt in order comparing what you see in front of you. Of course, here you are not so interested in just purely linguistic theoretical position, but mainly you look at the pragmatic aspects of language, that is, how language works in context, because this is what you really start. Of course, then you can draw theoretical conclusions and intuitions, but usually you start from pragmatic aspects of the language. So some that have been carried out in the last few years are textual semiotic analysis of discourses performances on site, in different sites in different places, interpreted ethnographic studies of professional practices, accounts of expertise by ratified members of the communities, first-hand interpretation of experience of involved members. All these have been part of this analysis. And these are the most typical sites of investigation. For example, directives, how they are enacted, how they are interpreted. Very often now we are asked to help define directives or in public communication, for example, the way meetings are run, why they don't work, they don't seem to come to any conclusion, how they are run, and often there is a linguistic problem, how consensus is negotiated, how leadership is performed, so a leader that can't transmit his or her own ideas and agenda to the rest of the group, ethical, ideological aspects, all these have been investigated in the last 20 years. And there are some caveats that have to be pointed out. Of course, as I said, it's important not just to stay in your own office or in your own room and examine the text, but also to have a direct knowledge of the context. That is, to talk to people, to interview people. So in this case, it is very important also to have this kind of exploration of the context. So you will find it necessary to meet with people, to talk, to find out, sometimes to visit the places. As I said before, because you have first to find out how a text has been conceived, how a text then has been received, in order to find out its failures, its strengths, and so on. It's a dynamic process which requires constant interaction with the professional. So what you find, you usually triangulate, that is, you submit it to confrontation with experts. This is what seems to be happening. Is this right? Is this wrong? Ah, yes, I hadn't noticed that, and so on. So there is this, it's not just taking the text and examining in your, on your own. It's actually exploring and having constant meetings and feedback with professionals. This also helps avoid what Sarangi calls the analyst paradox. That is, the risk of just accepting the practitioner's view. So, because, I mean, this is the problem, this is the context, you work, ah, yes, you are sort of bound by starting, of course, from the facts and from the literature that you have, that helps, but then you shouldn't be focused on just those, but be prepared also to unexpected results. Practitioners are not all there waiting for us with open arms. There are some that are skeptical about it. So they see us as mainly, in our case, for example, language teachers, and so therefore says, oh, what can you teach us? But the fact that they encourage our participation is because they have seen or heard that sometimes our work may be helpful. Of course, this is something that has to be sort of conquered and explained to them, but at first many, there might be one that is in favor of opening up and the rest are being very skeptical. So, and on the other hand, what we what we start from is a lack of adequate knowledge. That is, we are not legal experts, we are not business people. So if we start investigating legal discourse, business discourse, and so on, we have to find out more. But we have to keep in mind that we take some time before we start actually looking at the data, before we actually understand what is, for example, a certain legal process or a certain business procedure. So we should be prepared to invest. I mean, this is, of course, seen as a sort of problem by people. Say, why should I invest so much in learning about legal process and so on? I mean, if you want to really understand, you have to devote time. What comes as a result is something that, of course, if it is not limited to just an experience of 1 or 2 years, and you continue doing it, then it will become something that you invested originally, but then it will help you later on. So the case study that I want to refer here was a joint interdisciplinary research project with colleagues from the business, from the economics department, on the interpretation of John Maynard Keynes' general theory. So, as a matter of fact, this was suggested by economists. We linguists never thought of actually dealing with this text, because they were somehow perplexed, somehow confused about the problems in the reception of this important economic treaty. So there were often misunderstandings of the text, there were often divergent interpretations, and of course this contributed to the growth of the discipline of macroeconomics. This is the discipline that Keynes started, but at the same time it was considered to be somehow odd, and therefore they wanted to find out what was going on there. So the goal says, why don't we work and try to understand what is really happening here and why there are these misunderstandings and divergent interpretations. John Maynard Keynes is one of the leading figures of the economic world in the past century. He was a professor of economics at Cambridge, but particularly he was one of the most important economists. He took part in many of the solutions of the economic problems in the 20th century, just after the First World War, the economic disaster, the Wall Street collapse, the Second World War. He was the one that promoted the World Bank and many other things. And so he was actually one of the leading figures. He had a Nobel Prize, of course, for economics, and he became particularly famous for this, the general theory of employment, interest, and money, that he published in 1936, and which was then sort of paved the way to the Marshfield plan after the Second World War, and so on, to the Keynesianism, the theory, and so on. So it was really an interesting figure, and also he was interested in art, in literature, and politics, and so on. So it was a very complex figure. So we started with two hypotheses. So either Keynes somehow had not followed the traditional rules of specialized discourse, and therefore of economic register, and therefore people were not prepared to this new approach. Or, on the other hand, and this was a production sort of failure, on the other hand, the reception failure, that is, people had interpreted the text in the wrong way, not in the way that the writer had somehow planned. So we started from the second hypothesis, and we immediately saw that the interpretation given were diverging, and many of them just failed to see the novelty of Keynes' methodological approach. So Keynes was not just introducing a new discipline, but also a new epistemic methodological approach, and therefore people just looked at the data and the views without looking at the methodological approach. So they interpreted the new text according to a traditional way. That's why they saw discrepancies, and they were dissatisfied. Instead, I mean, what first Keynes introduced, and was the idea of macroeconomy, that is, macroeconomics, is actually to take many variables that had been studied separately, interest, money, offer, demand, everything, and see how instead they are all integrated. This seems quite obvious now to us, because we see that something happening in the stock exchange immediately has consequences elsewhere, and everything seems to be related, even now at political level. But this was the first time that such an intricate pattern of interrelations and intended purposes was somehow proposed and was analyzed. So that's why it was something that was more complex. So, this is what Keynes says in the text. So for us, we started mainly analyzing the text and the paratext. That is, I found that many other texts, such as letters, declaration documents, etc., helped me understand also something that is not directly in the text. But here, in the text already, he starts out with a clear goal. He says, the object of our analysis is not to provide a machine or method of blind manipulation which will furnish an infallible answer, but to provide ourselves with an organized, orderly method of thinking out particular problems. And after we have reached provisional conclusions, we, by isolating the complicating factors one by one, we then have to go back to ourselves and allow as well as we can for the probable interactions of the factors among themselves. So as you can see here, he says, okay, there are different issues, different theories that have then to be combined because they interact with each other. So, and this is reflected in the style of writing of Keynes, that he analyzes in chapter after chapter. It's a huge treatise, and so the different variables, but then he has also to show that they interact with each other. Mind you, at that time he didn't have, something that perhaps for us would have helped him, such as hypertext, that would enable you to click on it and go elsewhere and so on. He was still writing, in linear way, and therefore he had this problem of having interactions and then reporting them on the page, one page after the other. So this is clearly reflected in the many ways the author says, oh, I have to pause here and I'll come back after three chapters. So you have something here, the theory of wages in relation to employment, which we are here leading up, cannot be fully elucidated until chapter 19 and its appendix. So it's all, you have to go to get there, then get back. You have to interpret the text in a very complex way. We shall return to the aggregate supply function in chapter 20, where we discuss, and then we go back and so on. So as you can see, books 3, books 4, it has here the effect of fiscal policy on the growth of wealth has been the subject of important misunderstanding, which, however, we cannot discuss adequately without the assistance of the theory, which will be given in book 4. So now I have to stop here. I will deal with other things, then with interest, and then you will understand this. So it's a complex book, which requires that sometimes you don't find the solution in the chapter. You are told by the writer that the solution will only come 20 chapters later, when the whole view will be completed. While dealing with this complex phenomenon, the author often has to introduce new concepts because, of course, this is a new theory, and so he is introducing new concepts, which, of course, causes a pause in the argumentation because he introduces new terms, he introduces new concepts. So here he gives a brief summary of the theory, and then he continues. So there are these aspects which already tell you that the book was written in a complex way. So, of course, these were, particularly for people that are not so interested in the linguistic aspect as we are, they were usually taken or interpreted as digressions or as a sloppy way of writing, that is, starting, then not completing, then going on, and so on. But this is just because they were not following Keynes's line of thought. Of course, Keynes also makes it more complex by using language in a very flexible way. So we are often led to the idea that domain-specific terminology tend to be monoreferential, that is, you refer to a concept with a term, and if you change term, means you change concept. Instead, Keynes was still struggling with the new terms, and so some of the terms are polysemous, some of the terms are ambiguous. And this is disconcerting because instead we ourselves as analysts of specialized discourse, we want clear definitions, clear concepts. But he found that the univocal reference to lexical terms is not taken into account to give words different meanings. So he's still exploring. He's seen also language as a way of having intuitions, having new ideas. So he says if you use a sort of mathematical economics, here there are also two natures of economics. Economics starts from philosophy, Smith, etc., and then becomes more statistical, mathematical. So it struggles in these two extremes. And of course, people that have a more mathematical idea of economics, they tend to lose, as Keynes says, lose sight of the complexities and interdependencies of factors. So even language has to be somehow complex, interdependent. So he says the defining process itself, he says a definition can often be vague. We instead want clear definitions. So when you are trying to explore a new ground, you give a sort of preliminary definition, which then becomes clearer, and you have a final solution at the end of the book. But he is leading the reader to explore the ground, and therefore having vague definitions at first, explorations, and then coming to more secure, safer ways of defining things. I had also to look at letters, which helped me quite a lot. He says in a letter to another economist, he says, in my book I have deemed it necessary to go into definitions at disproportionate lengths. In writing economics, one is not writing either mathematical proof or a legal document. So again, not moral referentiality. One is trying to arouse and appeal to the reader's intuition. Again, a sort of more philosophical approach, more of the humanities side rather than the hard disciplines. So, as a matter of fact, he says that insights are important. And he's writing this book like this. He's exploring the ground. He's not just giving the solutions to the problem, but just telling you how he came to it. So it's a huge book because somehow he says, let's look at this, let's look at the other one. And there are insights that then will lead to a very complex theory. So the act of writing itself is part of a heuristic activity. He explores the ground and he interprets this exploration in his writing. So with lots of intuitions, deductions, hypotheses. As a matter of fact, it was very interesting to find also that sometimes he sees the book as something autonomous. He says, this book has evolved into what is primarily a study. So he is conscious that he is actually communicating, and at the same time he sees something growing. Of course, if you stop at a single chapter, you are sometimes perplexed because you don't come to a conclusion. But it's just the exploration, one chapter after the other, that leads you to the theory. Again, he has a different approach. That is, he sees the reader, rather than a passive recipient, as an active partner. And so he seeks reader's involvement. So what I write is sample statements, bundle of associated ideas sometimes, and in the end he says, it will take an economic writer from his reader, it will take a reader to goodwill, intelligence, and cooperation. So again, this is not something that we clearly see, apart from the fact that we don't find so many metatextual comments in an economic book. I mean, this proves that he's not only an economist, but also very sophisticated intellectual, because he's conscious also of how he's reasoning, how he's writing. He's aware of his interlocutor, and therefore a very interesting book. And he says what, for example, Eco has defined as an open work, that is something which is written but has to be completed by the recipient. So, as a matter of fact, he admits, this is a very complex issue. I have put so many things into this book, and it will take the collaboration of a number of minds to discover the final implications. Another aspect which puzzled me was that I often found in the literature about specialized discourse that specialized discourse tends to neglect passions, emotions, and so on. Instead, I found that the way of writing in Keynesian style is often plays on the emotional element. That is, particularly in some sections, he wants to arouse emotions in the reader with a very figurative, emotive language, which I found strange in a book of economics. And in a letter, I found confirmation. I want, so to speak, to raise a dust, because it is only out of controversy that will arouse that what I'm saying will get understood. So he was conscious that he was polemic, that he was somehow arousing emotions. But because he wanted not to be included in the tradition of previous economists, but to be seen as a revolutionary. So he was conscious that he had to have an emotional impact on this is particularly evident in chapter 12. In chapter 12, I was struck when I was reading by the very figurative style that he was using. Chapter 12 is about investments. Actually, this came out in 1936, so it was just after the disastrous experience of Wall Street. Many economists were still trying to find out what had gone wrong. Why, I mean, with so many theories about investments, money, and so on, we had this dramatic collapse all over the world, with disasters all over the world. And he says, look, I mean, what has been missed is the fact that people are not all, the investors are not all business experts. There are common people that are led by passions, that are led by intuitions, and therefore they go into panic. For example, you start saying, oh, it's a bad period, so they all start selling. And the more people sell, and the worse it is for the stock exchange. And this is what happened from one day to the other. And he points out the irrational element of investment, while for 200 years, everybody has instead written about economics as a very rational, very intellectual activity. He says, no, I mean, this is very rational sometimes. And he uses lots of lexical items that are quite strong in our linguistic terms, that is, metaphors and so on, usually emphasizing excess. So, for example, foolish, unreasoning, vagaries, irrational, disproportionately, outstanding, extreme, extensive, enormous, vast, abnormal. This is not the prudent attitude of a sophisticated economist. This is very passionate, something that we found mainly in literature or in politics, but not in economics. Disastrous, collapse, serious, violent, prevailing, predominates. So all the language is quite strong, but because it wants to emphasize the irrationality. Or to point out contrast between what is now, existing facts, and what is the result of investments, future events, reasonable. So you have all this contrast between now and future, reasonable, foolish, cold calculation, take a chance, fixed investments, liquid investments, revival, collapse, strengthening, weakening, enterprise, speculation, mathematical expectation, spontaneous. As you can see, all positive on one hand and negative on the other. So he points out the very, very risky aspect of investments, not only the positive ones, as had been pointed out, or the use of metaphors. In particular, there is one metaphor which is emphasized here. The metaphor between the comparison between investing and gambling. There are lots of, as you can see from page 150 to 159, I found at least 10. The affair was partly lottery, a mixed game of skill and chance, a pastime, competitions, players, pastime, game players, gambling. And he's writing about investments. So it's not about gambling. It's not about football or sports. So it was, and he ended up by saying that, I mean, investments is a byproduct of the activities of a casino. So it's quite shocking as something which is said. So what are the conclusions that we can draw from this brief analysis? I mean, I took this as a case study of something that I did with my team and some colleagues from the economics department. So it is, we may see how even taking part in this exploration of a specialized text sometimes causes us disturbances. I mean, I myself found so many principles that are somehow violated. And this caused, and this is one of the causes of why it was interpreted differently. So that the writer is, I mean, here, and the more autonomous, the more important a writer is, and the more certainly autonomous also in his writing style he tends to be. So this is quite obvious, and we saw in many cases. I mean, if you start and you are learning, you are not so creative. When you become an established celebrity, you can even be, as you can see here, disrupting the rules and changing the rules. So on the one hand, this was found interesting. As a matter of fact, it was praised by many economists. It was first published in a book in Italy, which was then republished in England for a wider audience. And so, because it's, nothing had been written in this way about the language and the style of Keynes. And so it was found that it was of help of disciplinary experts. At the same time, it, of course, after that there were many books about the methodology and a greater awareness, not only about the contents and the goals of macroeconomics, but also the methodology of it, so which became more important. In spite of the fact that we didn't know very much about it, however, our contribution was somehow felt to have facilitated, to have helped economists in interpreting an important text. But also because we brought our sensitivity to the text, our ideas, our ways of looking at the text, which they were not used to. So we helped probably make visible what was already there. As you can see, sometimes I found the explanations in letters, in other interviews, not there. But they integrated some insights that I clearly had from the text and the functions. It actually helped them acquire a new gaze, a new way of looking at things, not just intrinsically at the contents, but also at the style, and also the metatextual elements that the author provides. So somehow this, in our case, provided the fact that starting from empirically grounded research, we actually proved to have a role to play also in the interpretation of, and therefore, in the determination of discourse, and therefore we can acquire a greater role, social institutional relevance. I mean, now there are many cases in which companies or public institutions seek the help of linguists, for example, to prepare text, to analyze text, and so on. So they see us as experts in that field. However, this role requires full cooperation from both parties. That is, on the one hand, the specialists should be prepared to socialize the main practices, to talk to us, to give explanations, to help linguists to understand the context. And on the other hand, to turn but we have also the duty to make our intuitions accessible to them, not to expect that they know all the linguistic terms, all the theories that we have. So be able also to present our data in an understandable way and in a useful way. So, as I said before, by looking at single, let's say, problematic case studies, we may have also the possibility of seeing the limits of some existing theories, of some existing ideas that we often find in the literature, and examine the tenets of our discipline with a new way by presenting also, because as I said before, I mean, specialized discourse is a complex issue. and therefore it has to be seen in context. Of course, we should always remember that you don't want to become legal specialist or economic or business specialist and whatever. We want to remain linguists, and therefore our aim should be clear, and our also role and the kind of theoretical framework that we have should be sound. That is, we don't start, we have our own approach, and we start adopting this approach, and we adopt this approach in a very sound way. However, as you saw, in spite of the fact that our approach was very prudent, we were there learning at first, then in the end, we ended up by being the experts telling them something. So as you can see, our role was not seen as ancillary, that is, something as functional to their service, but something which somehow then in the end was seen as at the same level. I mean, you helped us understand something that we hadn't seen, and therefore we are grateful to you. Of course, we had to rely on lots of their expertise, lots of their possibilities of accessing text and so on, because otherwise we would not have looked at all these things. So, I mean, from our point of view, I mean, we were interested in seeing this case study as a way of improving our knowledge of linguistic theory, in particularly related to the discourse of specialized discourse. And this was our main aim. Also because this then, you can, I mean, we have to keep in mind where our main role is, our main function is, and so take advantage of all these cooperations without going from one project to the other without having a clear identity. So we all knew where we wanted to go and took all the chances. Then we had possibilities of cooperating with legal aspects with other, and so we increased our knowledge, but we knew that our field was specialized discourse. Thank you.
Yes. Now, I think we do have time for a few questions. So if there are any questions from the audience. Yes?
Thank you, Professor Gotti. As always, you're the best. It gives me great joy to know that you're collaborating with economists. It's not easy in Spain. We have a long way to go. And you have cited Keynes, who is one of my favorite authors because of his nuances, and his best disciple, Paul Krugman, but also Robert Stiglitz, and others from, less social democratic hue, such as Milton Friedman or Hayek, are being translated into Spanish by economists. All the nuances, all the rhetorical figures, all that blurred spaces that are only known by linguists are lost in those translations, and the result is flat. So this is just a remark. It's not really a question, as I was saying. I just wish things were different, in these parts of the world. That's all.
Well, I just add the reception of the text has been different. That's why also we were invited to have a look at it, because also in Italian we have had several different translations, and the nuances, of course, that were hinted at in the English texts were not often adopted or kept, and this, of course, limited the text. So nowadays it's a bit different because people now prefer to go back to the original, which is safer rather than, luckily, but until 30 or 40 years ago, I mean, in Italy, very few people knew or studied English, and therefore many economists had access to Keynes' volumes in translations. But then we had different theories, because one translation said something and the other translation said something else. As regards our role there, well, we have to somehow make explicit what we do at all levels, but in these conferences. But if we can also in our academic world, for example, in this case, the project started at the university canteen. So we were having lunch together, and they were talking about Keynes, and I started taking part in the conversation. How is this? How is that? And so on. Why? Do you know all these things? Well, I do some work in this field, and so on. Ah, okay. The next week we met again, because we had a lesson at the same time, says, how are things going, and so on. It developed and says, why don't we have a project together? So this is how it started. I mean, it didn't start from a call from the Horizon 2020. It was something that we have to promote also our knowledge, because they tend to see us, particularly in our university, I don't know whether here it's different, as language experts, meaning they teach English. So that's what they see us as, not so much as doing research and having an important role also in the academic. Mind you, we have to explain this also to our literary colleagues, because they see us in that way themselves. But it's just a way of actually talking about, and sometimes also publishing their journals. So, I mean, for example, having joint papers with them. So by combining the two competencies, they see that there is a different approach. So we are, now that even cooperation is promoted, we are less afraid of finding the opportunity of publishing together. Or in different fields, we always find the typical journals that more or less know what we are doing. Sometimes it may be useful also to publish in Journal of Economics, Journal of Legal Studies, and so on.
Now, I think there's another question. One very small thing, which is very important. This thing Dr. Cotti said about publishing in their journals, this is something some of us have already started doing. For example, Dr. Roth has already started. This is very important because years ago, they only came to us as translators of our language teachers. That was already a problem. Now it's even worse because they already speak English. So unless we refine our product and our portfolio, we are not perceived as necessary anymore. They speak English. If you approach the computers people, they already have a C1 or a C2 in English. They don't need us at all. Unless we can offer them something different and persuade them that we can sell them something different, there's no way there can be cooperation. So it is now our turn.
Thank you. No, I would just like to say thank you very much for a fascinating study, and to echo that I think it's wonderful that you're really bringing something that contributes very actively to their interpretation of their own field, and really also more a comment or a remark than a question. But for our colleagues who are perhaps not so familiar with the economic style, I'm sure you're very familiar with this quotation, but Harry S. Truman said, "For God's sake, bring me a one-handed economist," because economists are so well known for balancing on the one hand, on the other hand, and being so very rational and very objective that your insight that Keynes was using very rhetorical, very passionate, very persuasive and inflammatory language, I think really is an incredibly important insight for the discipline itself, and that the language itself was representing the break and the revolution in terms of language and in terms of theory. So I just wanted to underline that for our colleagues who might not be so aware of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had the impression that Keynes actually confessed or narrated the construction of the whole process. You know, there's so much research on the process, and yet when it is told, the process is avoided. There's such a contradiction. You know, we are so interested in learning, task-based learning, spiral thinking, clustering of ideas, and yet when we put them forward, we don't confess, you know? We leave the reader out there with a product as though it was manufactured, you know? Well,
yeah.
this is...
I mean, the whole process of construction and production of the text is very important. And sometimes, I mean, what they try to find is to find metatextual comments where the author himself actually tells us how the ideas have been developed, because we have to respect also the context and the framework. And in some texts we are favored by the fact that the author wants to convince us not only on the basis of the results, but also of the reasoning of it, how he came to those conclusions. And that's very fascinating. And I combine my comments with your previous comment, that is, we have a passion, perhaps, for the text. So no matter what the content is, but we are looking at the specific details of writer involvement, writer goals, the genres, the lexes. So, I mean, that's how I started. I mean, dealing with different fields that I knew very little about. So, but I was mainly interested. I wanted to find out. This is the passion that led us, mainly. Thank you.